You've been pulled over. A police officer walks up to you and starts asking you questions about drinking and driving. What do you do? Hey everybody, Jeff Hampton with Hampton Criminal Defense Attorneys here. I want to talk to you about 5 things you need to be aware of and ready for if a police officer pulls you over and starts asking you questions about drinking and driving. Number 1, don't talk so much. Now, this might sound obvious, but the moment you start getting talkative with a police officer when he pulls you over, and in fact, this pretty much applies to getting pulled over for anything. If you start talking enough, you're going to give the officer a reason to want to investigate you, maybe search your car, start listening to what you're saying, and start thinking that if maybe you're nervous or you don't exactly know why are you talking so much, the officer's going to start getting suspicious of you. So you are giving reasons for the officer to believe you're intoxicated. I want you to think about some of the things that this police officer is looking for. Every time a police officer sees what people used to call chatty Cathys, where someone starts talking about everything, even when they're not being asked questions, the officer starts saying, okay, this guy's hiding something. He doesn't want me to see what's either in the car or he's been drinking. He's extremely nervous. And so now he's going to start looking to interpret everything you are saying and doing as a possible sign of intoxication. For example, one of the things I see this too, a lot of people on the internet, some of my other videos, that you'll see people that'll talk about, well, you can be rude to the officer or you can just ignore the officer altogether. You don't ever have to say anything to a police officer when they pull you over. That is not necessarily true either. You must give them you got to give them your driver's license, your proof of insurance. That is absolutely required. But then I see some people who start being rude to the officer, like, why are you pulling me over? What's your problem? And start giving the officer attitude. You know what they're going to write down? So I've seen this a million times. Quote, suspect being combative and refusing to answer questions. Now notice what he'll say, being combative and confrontational. And here's what he'll say. This was a sign of intoxication. Now, officers write that down all the time. That now becomes that officer's word against yours. And in a jury trial, it is somewhat a bit of a popularity contest. If you're being rude to the officer, it's really easy for the jury to want to believe the officer and not you. Now, what do? Number 1, never argue with the officer. The officer is most likely going to do what he's going to do. There's no reason to argue with the officer to begin with. And have your driver's license and insurance ready. Just have it prepared. You can immediately reach out, hand it to the officer, keep your mouth closed. Be very kind, be very nice. You don't have to get into a big discussion. You don't have to say anything else at all. Don't open your mouth to give the officer a reason to believe that you're intoxicated. All right. Now, for one of the reasons why I say this is you can invoke your Fifth Amendment right. Once you've complied with what the officer's asked for, driver's license and insurance, now you can remain silent. You have no obligation to answer the officer's additional questions that he might provide to you at that point, no matter how upset or frustrated the officer may become. And you can find these examples that are out there where an officer wants to start asking questions. They want to start asking, hey, let's get into a dialogue here and find out what's going on with you. Where have you been? What's going on? You have no responsibility and no requirement constitutionally to answer those questions. Remember, it is not illegal to drink and drive. It is illegal to be intoxicated. That is the law when it comes to driving while intoxicated or driving, different states have it labeled in different ways. Could be DWI in Texas, other states it's DUI. But if the officer can get you to start admitting, even though we know the standard is it's not against the law to drink and drive, it's against the law to be intoxicated. But if that officer can get you to start admitting that you have been drinking, they will arrest you for DWI almost every single time. Because remember, an officer only needs probable cause, a very small amount of evidence to arrest you and get you in. Because in reality, what they want to do is arrest you and get you over to see if they can compel a blood draw so that they can determine what your blood alcohol level may be. So that's number 1. Don't talk so much. Keep your mouth closed. Number 2, remember what the officer is looking for. Look, this officer is looking for specific signs that they have been trained on to determine whether or not they can put this in their report as showing a sign of intoxication. These are some things. Highlight this in your mind. The officer is looking for some of these things. These common signs of intoxication. In fact, if you've never seen a police report, a DWI report, you're going to see there are actual rubber stamped portions of the report in there that allow them to check off these possible signs of intoxication. So, look, you're a nail and they're a hammer. They're going to be looking for anything they see that they can hammer that nail. And that's exactly what they're going to look at here. Let me give you some examples of what we're talking about. Number 1, physical signs. What are some physical signs that they're going to be looking at? A strong odor of an alcoholic beverage. They even have that listed. A strong odor, moderate odor, or light odor of an alcoholic beverage. They'll check mark that. Number 2, and by the way, how do they know that? Many times it's when you open your mouth, right? Slurred speech. It may not even be slurred speech, but once you start talking, you might be nervous and he's going to mark it down as being slurred speech. Unsteady on your feet. That's another thing that they're looking for. If at any point in time you being nervous if you're asked to step out of the vehicle, they're going to mark that down. The next one they're going to be talking about is bloodshot, watery eyes, or confused responses. Now I want you to notice, we find this happens all the time. Someone's that's tired, maybe someone who has been staying up working a double shift and they're on their way home, or maybe there's allergies. There's all kinds of other reasons why someone might have bloodshot, watery eyes. The officer, if he sees this, is going to mark it down as a sign of intoxication every single time. Okay, those are physical signs. What about mental signs? Confusion, unable to find or hand over your identification or your insurance. Attitude problems, unable to follow directions or instructions. Now, I want you to notice here, this is why the more you cooperate with the officer and give them what they want, the more they can interpret your cooperation as a sign of intoxication. Notice a lot of these things: confusion, unable to hand over your ID and your insurance. What they're talking about there could also be a sign of you being nervous. You could be scared to death. You're on the side of the road. You know, this officer's investigating you for a DWI. These can be masked. They're going to write it down as DWI, as a sign of intoxication, but they could also be for other reasons. You're nervous. You really can't find your ID. Well, that doesn't mean you're intoxicated. This is the reason why you have to have a plan in place if an officer ever looks to try to pull you over. Understand what they're looking for. So that's number 2. Now, what about number 3? Field sobriety tests. Think carefully before you agree to participate with them. Now, here's what we want to talk about. If you refuse, let's talk about refusing them for a moment. You have no responsibility, no legal requirement to take field sobriety tests. Now, I know there's the law that in most states there's something known as the implied consent law, where in many states you impliedly consent to provide either a sample of your breath, blood, or urine, or in many cases be able to cooperate with field sobriety tests if the officer believes that you're intoxicated. But the only penalty for that is it can affect your driver's license in terms of a potential suspension. But when we start talking about your actual constitutional rights from a criminal law case, it's really important to understand you could be cold sober. You could have done absolutely nothing wrong, had nothing to drink, had no drugs in your system, prescription or otherwise, and you could still fail the field sobriety test all the time. In fact, we see it happen all the time. I've seen people pass the field sobriety tests and the officers still choose to arrest them. And without going into overall detail on this, one example is you've got three primary tests. One is the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, which is basically the pen test, where the officer is looking for what's called nystagmus, the involuntary jerking of the eye. Okay, that's a belief there that's able to show that someone who has that involuntary jerking that's visible, that can be a sign of intoxication. Okay. Now, the other 2 tests are actual physical tests. You have to hold your foot up, looking down, hands down by your side, and count to 30 seconds. Well, why would you ever put your foot down in that situation? You could be absolutely stone cold sober, never had anything to drink, and still fail that test. What if you're overweight? What if you have balance problems? What if you've had surgeries? What if you're nervous? What if you're just scared to death? Understand, no good deed goes unpunished. You cooperate with this process. Many times, anything other than absolute perfection can be marked down and will be marked down as being intoxicated. So understand that. So I've told many clients this: the only negative to refusing is that they will arrest you and they will try to use that as a grounds to establish that there is probable cause for an arrest or a search warrant to take your blood. Now, and that is the case. Certainly in Texas, you refusing to provide field sobriety tests can be used as probable cause to establish a blood draw to be taken by a signed search warrant by the judge. But can I tell you right now, they're going to get your blood either way. if you cooperate. Very few times I've ever seen somebody ever where you see an example of an officer let someone go if they've been drinking. So you have to understand what those risks are when you talk about field sobriety tests. Now, what if you choose to take the tests? Let's talk about that for a second. Beware, if you do not follow the instructions precisely, I mean to a T, they will fail you. One of the best examples of this is the walk and turn test. They want you to take 9 steps down, literally 1 foot in front of the other, heel to toe, and then execute a 3-point turn. And they explain to you exactly what that is as you execute that 3-point turn. Guess what happens if you start the test before they say go? That's a clue. What happens if you execute a 2-point turn, but not a 3-point turn? That's a violation number 2. You only need 2 violations to fail the entire test. I mean, you could be 100% sober and fail that test because you did not follow their precise instructions to a T. Really important to understand that. And I mentioned this earlier, but if you have any knee, foot, back problems, if you don't, if you have any concerns of having been overweight, under the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, these are all legitimate reasons why many of these tests, particularly the walk and turn and the one-leg stand tests, can be proven to be unreliable. So it's important that you're working with an attorney that's going to be able to exploit that if you have a DWI case, to help people understand that prosecutor needs to realize your lawyer is aware of the fact these are non-intoxicating reasons why someone might not do well on those tests. Now, and next point is, if you're going to take these tests, always explain how nervous you are. It's important to tell the officer, I'm scared to death. I'm on the side of the road. There's cars going by here. I'm sorry. Can you repeat those instructions again? Not because I can't understand them. It's because I'm terrified. I've got cars driving by here, and I know that you're going to be judging me whether I go to jail or not on this. It is always the officer's responsibility to make the instructions clear. It's not your responsibility to have to fill in the blanks. Make that officer explain it to you thoroughly. You can ask them to demonstrate it for you. I've actually seen officers demonstrate the test wrong, and then they judge the individual on the side of the road based upon a different standard. It's really important. These are the type of things that can help in a DWI defense. Okay, finally, breath and blood testing. Number 4, should you consent? Should you consent to a breath or blood test? Now, first of all, let me address the portable breath test. There's the little small handheld device. Sometimes officers will approach you with a portable breath test, and in Texas, if they do, always consent. The reason why? Portable breath tests are not admissible in court in Texas. And so I have actually seen individuals take the portable breath test and the officer looked to potentially release them from the side of the road if they came in under the limit. Now, I can't speak to this in other states. That's not always the case. So it's really important you research portable breath test law in your particular state. But in Texas, you can absolutely take that portable breath test because they can't use it against you in court. Now, what's the benefit? Why do they want you to consent? The officer wants you to consent because, first of all, they can get a breath or blood test result much quicker. Think about it. If you consent to a breath or blood test, immediately what they're able to do is take you over there, blow into an Intoxilizer 5000. The next thing you know, they're going to have a test result right then. Why do they want that? Because it ties you to having a particular blood alcohol level at or near the time of driving, so it makes it easier for them to be able to prove your intoxication level. But what if you don't consent? You say, no way, I'm not going to participate in this. Now what they're going to have to do is go get a search warrant. And after they get that search warrant, here's the next move. They're going to have to bring you over. They have to make sure and follow all the specific requirements of state law when they do a blood draw. It needs to be a qualified technician. They need to make sure that they drew the blood properly. They have to make sure that they get 2 vials. They have to seal the vial properly. There's a multiple list of requirements that are mandated by state law and criminal law that if they do not follow those, that blood draw will not be admissible in court. And here's the other reason why. The police must actually prove your intoxication at the time of driving, not later. And what I mean by that is we've actually had clients where they did give a blood draw 4 hours later, 5 hours later. And let's say their blood alcohol level was 0.09, okay? Well, what does that show? That they were a 0.09 4 hours after driving. That does not show that they were over the legal limit at the time of driving. Someone could have just had 3 or 4 shots of alcohol literally 10 minutes before they got pulled over, and their blood alcohol level will be higher when they give their test multiple hours later than it was at the time they were driving. In other words, the blood result is much less reliable the further in time away it is from the time you were driving your vehicle. Really important to understand that. Finally, number 5, always remember the arrest decision is going to come down to the officer's opinion. So don't pick fights with the officer. Remember that everything you say, you're basically an audition for an arrest, and that's how the officer is going to look at it. And in fact, don't ever believe you can talk your way out of a DWI arrest. Go search some other YouTube videos. You're going to find out there people have tried and they failed. They end up being the joke on YouTube because they tried to talk their way out of a DWI arrest. Remember, keep your mouth closed, hand them your driver's license and insurance. You don't have to participate in the field sobriety test. You don't have to give a breath or blood test. And remember, you don't have to be rude, but don't help the officer try to arrest you at the end of the day. Limit how much that officer has to consider in making his arrest decision. The fight is not on the roadside. The fight is in court with your DWI attorney. Thanks for joining us on this video here today. I'll see you on our next video series.